The morning of my 74th birthday crept in quietly, the kind of soft Ohio dawn that paints the world in shades of gray and gold. I stood in my kitchen, smoothing the collar of my favorite green sweater, the one I'd knitted for my husband George before his long illness stole him away. The yarn was frayed now, a little worn at the elbows, but it still felt like him, like the life we'd built in this house over 40 years. My hands, spotted with age, trembled as I fastened the top button. Not from the cold, but from something. Heavier, something I couldn't name. Today was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt more like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push me over. My name is Clara Mayhew, and at 74, I'd become a ghost in my own family's story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share where you're listening from. I could use the company today. My kitchen smelled of coffee and the faint lavender of the dish, soap I'd used since the kids were small. This house, with its creaky floors and chipped paint, held every memory I had raising to children, nursing George through his final days, teaching third graders their multiplication tables until I retired 10 years ago. But now it felt like a shell echoing with the absence of the people I'd loved. My youngest, Nathan, lived out in Oregon, chasing a life in tech that kept him too busy for more than a Christmas card and a birthday call. Duty, not devotion. My daughter Ellen lived just 20 miles away. But she treated me like an old textbook useful once, but now gathering dust. And then there was Roland, my firstborn, the boy I'd poured my heart into. He used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard, his small hands clutching them like treasures. But somewhere along the way, Roland became someone else's shadow. Victor, his best friend since college, had a way of twisting people to fit his plans. He was all charm and sharp edges, the kind of man who smiled while slipping a knife into your trust. Over the years, Victor had pulled Roland away from me bit by bit. Family dinners stopped. Holiday invitations dried up. My phone calls went unanswered, or worse, answered with excuses about how busy they were, how Victor needed Roland's help with some new business venture. I'd become a footnote in my son's life, erased by a man who looked at me like I was already gone. So when Roland called yesterday, his voice bright with an unfamiliar warmth, I froze. "Happy birthday, Mom," he'd said, the words dripping with something too sweet, like syrup gone bad. "I want to take you to dinner tomorrow, just you and me. It's been too long." I should have said no. Every instinct I'd honed over 7 decades screamed that something was wrong. Roland hadn't suggested dinner in years, not since Victor started whispering in his ear. But there was a part of me, foolish and fragile, that wanted to believe my son still cared. That at 74, I might still matter to someone. I set the phone down and looked around my kitchen. The clock ticked too loudly. The photo of George and me, taken at the county fair in '85, stared back from the fridge. I was smiling in that picture, my hair still brown, my eyes bright with the certainty of being loved. Now, my hair was silver, my eyes tired, and the only certainty I had was that loneliness could carve a person hollow. Maybe that's why I said yes to Roland's invitation. Maybe I was chasing the ghost of the boy who'd once called me his hero. Or maybe I just wanted to know what he was planning. Either way, I agreed. "Dinner sounds lovely," I told him, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. The morning passed in a blur of small rituals, watering the geraniums on the porch, feeding the stray sparrows that gathered in my backyard, checking the mailbox for anything other than bills. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until Roland arrived. Each tick felt like a warning, but I pushed it down. Hope, even a foolish one, is a stubborn thing. By noon, I was ready, my purse slung over my shoulder, the green sweater, a quiet armor against whatever lay ahead. I stood by the front door, watching the street through the lace curtains Georgia's mother had hung decades ago. A sleek black car pulled into my driveway, too polished for this quiet street. Roland stepped out, his face tight with a smile that didn't quite fit. "Ready for your special day, Mom?" he asked, his voice carrying that same syrupy tone from the phone. I nodded, clutching my purse a little tighter. As I locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping out of my life and into something else entirely. Something I wasn't sure I'd come back from. The leather seats of Roland's car felt cold against my hands. It's too smooth, too perfect for a woman like me who'd spent her life in classrooms full of sticky fingers and chalk dust. Fair inside, smelled of pine, air freshener, and something sharper, like ambition polished to a sheen. Roland sat behind the wheel, his hands steady, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't looked at me since I'd climbed in. Not really. His smile from the driveway was gone, replaced by a tightness around his mouth that reminded me of his. "Father, when he was hiding something, you look nice, Mom," he said finally, his voice clipped. Like he was reading from a script. "Thank you." "Roland," I replied, keeping my tone light, though my fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. It was an old canvas bag, faded from years of carrying lesson plans and library books. Nothing like the glossy world Roland lived in now, the one Victor had built for him. We pulled out of my driveway, and I watched my little house shrink in the side mirror. The geraniums on the porch glowed red in the noon light, a splash of color against the weathered siding. Across the street, Mrs. Delaney was pruning her roses, her straw hat bobbing as she waved at me. I waved back, a small gesture that felt like a lifeline to the life I knew. "Where are we headed?" I asked, glancing at Roland. His jaw twitched, just slightly. "It's a surprise," he said, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. "Somewhere special. You'll love it." His words were warm, but they landed cold. I'd taught children for 30 years, long enough to know when someone was dodging the truth. Roland had always been a terrible liar, as a boy his eyes would dart away, his hands fidgeting. He wasn't much better now. I turned to the window, watching the familiar streets of our Ohio town roll by, the park where I'd pushed Roland on the swings until he was dizzy with laughter, the bakery where I'd bought him cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning, the church where I still volunteered sorting donations for the food pantry. Each landmark felt like a piece of me, anchoring me to a life that was mine. But as we turned onto the main road and the town began to fade, a quiet unease settled in my chest. The bakery was gone. The church was a speck in the distance. We passed the gas station where young Tommy always asked about my garden with a grin. Then the road widened, and we were on the interstate, heading west, away from everything I knew. "Roland," I said, keeping my voice steady, "where exactly are we going?" He glanced at me, just for a second, before his eyes snapped back. "To the road. I told you, Mom. It's a surprise. We've been driving for nearly an hour." "What restaurant is this far out?" His laugh was sharp, like glass splintering. "Not a restaurant, Mom. Somewhere better. Somewhere right for you." The words hung between us, heavy and wrong, like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. My body went still, the way a deer freezes when it hears a twig snap in the woods. Every instinct I'd honed over 74 years screamed that this was no birthday dinner. This was something else, something planned, something I hadn't been invited to decide. I shifted in my seat, my purse resting on my lap. Inside was my phone, a simple flip model Nathan had given me 2 Christmases ago, insisting I needed it just in case. I grumbled about it then, but now it felt like a lifeline. My fingers, stiff from years of grading papers, moved slowly, deliberately, unzipping the purse just enough to slip my hand inside. Roland's eyes were glued to the road, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. "It's a place where you'll be comfortable," he said suddenly, his voice taking on that tone people use when they think you're too old to understand. "Somewhere you can rest, be taken care of. You won't have to worry about the house anymore, or cooking, or being on your own." My thumb found the phone's keypad, muscle memory guiding me through the dark. I'd spent months learning to text, ignoring Ellen's sighs about how I was too old for gadgets. Messages, recent contacts. Margaret Cole, my attorney, Hood. Been a friend since we taught Sunday school together decades ago. She'd handled George's estate, helped me sort out my will, and lately, she'd been helping me prepare for something I hadn't wanted to believe was coming. I typed one word: urgent. The phone vibrated softly as the message sent. A faint hum swallowed by the hum of the engine. Roland kept talking, his voice growing smoother, more rehearsed. Victor found this place. It's got everything: activities, nice rooms, people. Your age, you'll be happy there, Mom. It's what's best. Best for who? I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I was remembering the signs I'd ignored for too long. The late-night calls between Roland and Victor that stopped when I walked into the room. The way Roland had started asking about my savings, my pension, my plans for the future. The real estate agent who'd knocked on my door last spring, asking if I'd considered selling, as if someone had sent him. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind from a conversation 3 months ago. Clara, she'd said, her eyes sharp behind her glasses, if they're planning something, they'll move fast. People like Victor don't wait. You need to be ready. So I prepared. Not just with Margaret, who'd set up safeguards that would make Roland's jaw drop when he found out, but in my own heart. I'd known this day might come, seen it in Victor's calculating smiles, in Roland's guilty silences, in the way they talked about me like I was a problem to be solved. The interstate stretched on, mile markers flashing by like warnings. Roland's fingers drummed faster now, his calm cracking at the edges. His phone buzzed in the console between us. Once, then again. Ignored it, but his shoulders tensed. Aren't you going to check that? I asked, my voice mild, like I was asking about the weather. It can wait, he said. Too quickly. The phone buzzed again, insistent. Maybe it's Victor, I suggested. Maybe it's important. His jaw clenched, and he grabbed the phone. Glancing at the screen, I caught the name before he silenced it. Willow Haven. The name hit me like a stone. Willow Haven, the care facility where Mrs. Larson from my knitting group had been sent by her daughter last year. She'd lasted 4 months before her heart gave out, not from age, but from being locked away from her life. Roland's phone buzzed again, a text this time. His eyes flicked between the screen and the road, and I saw something new in his face: panic. Everything. Okay, dear, I asked, letting a touch of sweetness slip into my voice. He didn't answer. His hands were shaking now, just enough to notice. The car slowed, and he pulled onto the shoulder at the next exit. Whatever was on that phone had unraveled him, and I sat there, my heart pounding but my mind clear, knowing that whatever came next, I wasn't the helpless old woman he thought I was. The hum of the interstate faded as Roland pulled the car onto the shoulder gravel, crunching under the tires. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might crack. His phone still buzzing in the console like an angry wasp. The name Willow Haven lingered in my mind, a cold weight that settled deeper with every unanswered call. I sat still, my purse on my lap, my fingers resting lightly on the canvas, as if I were just an old woman waiting patiently for her son to sort things out. But inside, my heart was racing, and my mind was sharp, piecing together the puzzle I'd been solving for months. Roland, I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. What's going on? He didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen like he was afraid to touch it. It's nothing. Mom, he said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Just a mix-up. Don't worry. Don't worry. The same words he'd used when I'd asked about the real estate agent who'd shown up at my door last spring, asking if I was ready to downsize. The same words Victor had used when I overheard him on the phone talking about securing the asset. I'd known then that something was wrong, but I hadn't wanted to believe my own son could be part of it. Not Roland, who'd once drawn me pictures of sunflowers and promised to build me a treehouse when he grew up. But the man sitting next to me wasn't that boy anymore. He was a stranger, caught in Victor's web, and I was the prize, they thought. They could claim Roland. I said again, softer this time, where are you taking me? He finally turned, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since we'd left the house. There was something, their guilt, maybe, or fear, but it was buried under a layer of resolve. "It's called Willow Haven," he said, his voice steady. Now, like he'd rehearsed this. "It's a care facility. It's a good one. Victor checked it out himself. They've got everything you need. Nurses, activities, people to look after you. You won't have to struggle anymore, Mom. It's the best place for you. The best place for me." The words cut deeper than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were so calculated. As if my life, my home, my garden, my mornings with the sparrows could be reduced to a problem that needed solving. As if I were a piece of furniture to be stored away. "Struggle?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, letting the word hang between us. "What makes you think I'm struggling?" He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now. "The house is too big, Mom. You're alone all the time. You're not getting any younger. Victor and I, we just want you to be safe." Safe. Another lie, dressed up as kindness. I could feel the anger rising, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down. Anger wouldn't help me now. I needed to stay clear, to stay in control. My fingers brushed the edge of my watch, the old silver one George had given me for our 20th anniversary. It was more than a keepsake now. It was my lifeline. 3 months ago, Margaret Cole, my attorney and friend, had suggested I wear it every day, just in case, she'd said, her voice low and serious. She'd show me the tiny GPS tracker hidden inside, a precaution she'd insisted on after I told her about Roland's odd questions and Victor's late-night visits. "Anything happens, Clara," she'd said, "we'll know where you are. One message, and I'll take care of the rest." I'd sent that message 20 minutes ago. Urgent. One word, typed blind in the dark of my purse. Now, I just had to wait. Roland's phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it, his voice sharp. "What?" "Yes, we're almost there." "No, she's fine. Just handle it." He hung up, but his hands were shaking now, and he didn't try to hide it. "Everything okay?" I asked, my tone light, almost teasing. Though my pulse was hammering in my ears. "It's fine," he snapped, but his eyes darted to the rearview mirror. And I saw the first crack in his composure. I leaned back in my seat, letting the silence stretch. The interstate was quiet now, just the occasional hum of a passing car. In the distance, I heard something else, faint at first, then louder. Sirens. Roland heard them too. His head snapped up, his eyes wide as he scanned the mirrors. "What the?" he muttered, his voice trailing off as 2 police cruisers appeared. Behind us, their red and blue lights cutting through the afternoon haze. My heart leaped, but I kept my face still, my hands folded neatly over my purse. The cruisers pulled up, one on either side, and a voice crackled through a loudspeaker. "Pull over to the shoulder and step out of the vehicle." Roland's face went pale, his hands fumbling as he guided the car to a stop. "Mom, I don't. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, but his words were drowned out by the sound of boots on gravel. A young officer approached Roland's window, his face calm but firm. "Sir, step out of the vehicle, please." Roland hesitated, then complied, his movements jerky like a puppet with tangled strings. Another officer, a woman with kind eyes and a badge that read SGT Carter, came to my door. "Mrs. Mayhew, are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," I said, accepting her hand as I stepped out onto the shoulder. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dust and wild grass. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. "Your attorney, Margaret Cole, contacted us about 30 minutes ago." SGT Carter said, her voice steady. "She said you might be in danger. We tracked your location through the device in your watch." I nodded, touching the silver band on my wrist. Margaret's always been thorough. Across the car, Roland was talking to the other officer, his voice rising in pitch. "This is ridiculous. I was just taking my mother to a care facility. She's not well. She needs help. We're trying to do what's best for her." The lie was smooth, practiced, but it fell apart under the officer's steady gaze. "Sir, we'll need documentation to support that." Medical records, court orders, power of attorney. Anything to indicate Mrs. Mayhew has agreed to this. Roland's mouth opened, then closed, his face a mask of panic. Because, of course, there were no records, no diagnoses, no legal papers. It's just a plan, months in the making, built on greed. And the assumption that a 74-year-old woman would be too frail, too trusting. To fight back. SGT. Carter turned to me, her expression softening. Mrs. Mayhew, can you tell us what happened? I took a deep breath, the weight of the day settling into my bones. My son invited me to dinner for my birthday, I said. But instead he was taking me to Willow Haven, a care facility 2 hours from home. I never agreed to go there. I never agreed to leave my house. Roland's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with something like betrayal. Mom, that's not Victor, said Victor. I interrupted, my voice sharp now, is not. My son, you are. And you chose to do this. Before he could respond, another car pulled up, a familiar Navy sedan. Margaret Cole stepped out, her gray hair pulled back, her suit slightly wrinkled as if she'd rushed from her office. Her eyes found mine, and the relief in them was palpable. Clara, she said, striding toward me. Thank God you're okay. I'm fine, Margaret, I said, managing a small smile. It's just as we planned. She nodded, her gaze shifting to Roland, who was now being questioned more intensely by the officer. They were taking you to Willow Haven, weren't they? She asked, her voice low. I nodded. He said it was the best place for me. Said I'd be comfortable there. Margaret's jaw tightened. Comfortable for them, maybe. Not for you. She turned to SGT Carter. I have evidence of financial motives. Preliminary inquiries about Mrs. Mayhew's property, attempts to access her accounts, and a deposit paid to Willow Haven 6 weeks ago. This wasn't about care. This was about control. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The truth I'd kept even from Margaret until recently. There's something else, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. My assets, the house, my savings, George's investments, they're not what Roland and Victor think they are. I transferred most of it into a charitable trust last month. For elderly advocacy. They'll get nothing, Margaret's eyes widened, then softened with something like pride. Roland, still within earshot, froze, his face draining of color. What? He whispered, the word barely audible. I looked at him, my son, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd tried to erase me. You thought you could sell my life for a profit? I said. But I've been one step ahead of you. And I always will. B. The police cruiser's lights faded into the distance, taking Roland with them. They hadn't been arrested, not yet. But the officers needed his statement. And I could see the weight of his choices pressing down on him as he climbed into their car. His shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding mine, as if he could still pretend this was all a misunderstanding. I stood on the shoulder of the interstate, the autumn wind tugging at my green sweater. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground, steady beneath my feet. Margaret drove me home, her Navy sedan a quiet sanctuary after the chaos. You were brilliant, Clara, she said, her hands steady on the wheel. That watch, that message, you outsmarted them both. I managed a small laugh, though it felt hollow. I didn't want to be right about my own son, Margaret, but I had to be ready. She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. You're stronger than most, Clara Mayhew. Don't ever forget that. When we pulled into my driveway, the sight of my little house, its sagging porch, its geraniums, still bright against the dusk, felt like a hug from an old friend. I thanked Margaret, promising to meet her at her office tomorrow to sort out the legal mess. But tonight, I needed to do something else, something I'd been putting off for too long. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Roland used to do his homework, his crayons scattered across the wood. In front of me was a stack of stationery, the kind George used to tease me for. Hoarding. Clara, he'd say, you're going to write the great American novel on all that paper. Maybe not a novel, but tonight I had a story to tell. I wrote a letter, my hand steady despite the ache in my fingers. It wasn't an email too. Cold, too easy to ignore. This was personal. Each word pressed into the page with the weight of truth. I told my family everything. Roland's plan to take me to Willowhaven. Victor's role in orchestrating it. The deposit they'd paid 6 weeks ago to lock me away. I wrote about the real estate agent who'd accidentally knocked on my door, the whispered phone calls I'd overheard, the way they'd built a lie that I was too frail to live my own life. And I told them about the charitable trust. How I'd protected my assets to help others. It's not to line their pockets. I addressed the letter to everyone who'd been kept from me. Nathan in Oregon. Ellen 20 miles away. My granddaughter Sophie. Roland's 2 boys who barely knew me. The cousins and friends Victor had convinced to stay away. By the time I sealed the last envelope, it was nearly midnight, and my kitchen was littered with stamps and ink smudges. I mailed them the next morning, dropping them into the mailbox with a kind of quiet defiance. The fallout came fast. By noon. The next day, my phone was buzzing with messages. Nathan called from Oregon, his voice thick with anger and guilt. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? I'm booking a flight right now." Sophie, my granddaughter, sent a text at 2 a.m. Her words. Raw with shock. "Grandma Clara, I'm so sorry. They told us you didn't want visitors, that you were confused. I'm coming to see you." Ellen showed up at my door that afternoon, her face a mask of careful composure. She wore a tailored coat, her hair pulled back in a way that screamed. "Control, Mom," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "This is getting out of hand." Roland made a mistake, sure, but sending that letter to everyone. It's causing drama we don't need. Drama. The word came. From behind me, sharp and clear. Sophie had arrived just minutes earlier, her dark hair messy from the drive, her eyes blazing with a fierceness that reminded me of myself at 20. "Aunt Ellen, he tried to kidnap Grandma. He lied to us, said she was losing her mind. That's not drama. That's a crime." Ellen's lips tightened, but she didn't back down. "You don't understand, Sophie. We've been worried about Mom. The house is too much for her. She's been so isolated, refusing help. Have you ever asked me what I want?" I cut in, my voice quiet but firm. "Have any of you sat down and asked what I need?" The silence was heavy, broken only by the tick of the kitchen clock. Ellen looked away, her hand smoothing her coat as if she could iron out the truth. Sophie stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. "I didn't know, Grandma," she said, her voice breaking. "Dad told us you were sick, that you didn't want us around. I called Dr. Ellis's office this morning. They said you're fine, sharp as ever." I squeezed her hand, my heart swelling at the sight of Roland's daughter, but so much more than his lies. "They thought of everything," I said softly. "Fake doctor's visits, fake concerns, all to make me disappear." Roland's? Calls started that evening, one after another, each voicemail more desperate than the last. "Mom, please. It was Victor's idea. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Call me back. We need to talk." I let the phone ring, sipping chamomile tea from the mug George had bought me on our last anniversary. Each unanswered call felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of the space I'd let them take from me. Margaret called later, her voice brisk but warm. "The police are looking into Victor's financial records," she said. "He's been pressuring Roland to sell your house to cover his debts. That deposit to Willowhaven. It came from Victor's account, but Roland signed off on it." I closed my eyes, picturing my son, the boy who'd once promised to protect me, signing away my freedom for a man who saw me as an obstacle. "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll face charges," Margaret said. "Attempted kidnapping. Conspiracy to commit fraud. The trust you set up, that was a masterstroke, Clara. They can't touch a penny." I hung up, staring at the letter I'd kept on the table. The one addressed to Roland. I hadn't mailed it yet. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to let him stew in his guilt. But another part, the part that still remembered the boy with the sunflowers, wanted him to know exactly what he'd done. Not to forgive him, not yet, but to make him see me, really see me, for the first time in years, as I sealed his letter. Sophie appeared in the kitchen, her eyes red but determined. "I'm staying the night, Grandma," she said. Nathan's flight gets in tomorrow. We're not letting you go through this alone." For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel alone. The weight of their betrayal was still there, but so was something new, something like hope, fragile but growing. Like the first green shoot in my garden after a long winter, the Oregon air was different, crisper, lighter, with a hint of pine that reminded me of the camping trips George and I used to take when the kids were small. I stood on the porch of my new cottage, a cozy place just 3 blocks from Nathan's house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It had been 2 months since that birthday drive with Roland. 2 months since I'd stared down the truth of what my son had tried to do. And now, here I was, starting over at 74. In a place I never imagined I'd call home. The cottage was small but bright, with big windows that let in the morning light and a garden that was already becoming my sanctuary. I'd brought my geraniums. From Ohio, their red blooms a reminder of the life I'd left behind, but also of the life I was building now. Nathan had helped me move, his tech bro efficiencies softened by the way he lingered, making sure I had everything I needed. Sophie, my granddaughter, had driven up from her college in Portland, her car stuffed with books and a fierce determination to make up for lost time. They were my anchors now, the family I'd thought I'd lost. But it wasn't just them. There was Ruth, my new neighbor, a retired chef who'd shown up the day after I moved in with a plate of oatmeal cookies and a laugh that filled the room. "Clara," she'd said, brushing flour off her apron, "you look like someone who could use a friend." And I'm not taking no for an answer. She hadn't. Ruth was at my cottage almost daily now, sharing recipes, gossiping about the neighborhood, book club, or coaxing me into walks along the nearby river trail. It was Ruth who'd found Rusty, the scruffy little terrier who'd wandered into my garden one morning, his fur matted but his eyes bright with hope. "He's chosen you," Ruth had said, tossing him a scrap of bacon. I named him Rusty, for the reddish tint in his coat, and now he followed me everywhere, his tail wagging like a metronome. These were the small joys that filled my days now, planting tomatoes with Sophie, reading with Rusty curled up at my feet, laughing with Ruth over coffee. They were the threads of a new life, woven together to mend the holes left by Roland's betrayal. But healing wasn't just about finding joy. It was about drawing lines, setting boundaries, and refusing to let guilt pull me back into the past. Roland had written to me, a letter that arrived a week after I settled in Oregon. It was long, full of apologies and excuses, blaming Victor for everything. "I was desperate, Mom," he wrote. "The business was failing, and Victor said Willow Haven was the only way to keep you safe and help us start over." I read it once, then tucked it away in a drawer. Words were easy. Actions were harder. I wrote back, not with forgiveness, but with terms. "You will attend counseling, Roland," I wrote. "You will pay back the deposit you made to Willow Haven. You will write to every family member you lied to, explaining what you did and why. And you will understand that my trust is not a given. It's something you earn, if you ever can." He called the next day, his voice trembling with something like shame. "I'll do it, Mom. Whatever you want." But I didn't answer. I let the phone ring just as I had in Ohio, because I wasn't ready to hear his voice. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Ellen was another story. She'd called once, a curt message about how I'd blown things out of proportion and embarrassed the family. When I didn't respond, she went silent, her absence a kind of relief. I'd spent too many years chasing her approval, hoping she'd see me as more than an inconvenience. Now, I was done chasing, but Nathan and Sophie, they were different. Nathan came by every weekend, bringing his kids, my great-grandchildren, who ran through my garden like it was a playground. Sophie spent her breaks with me, teaching me how to use the fancy smartphone she'd insisted I needed. "You're not too old for this, Grandma," she'd say, laughing as I fumbled with the touchscreen. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch with Rusty sprawled across our feet, Sophie looked at me with those serious eyes of hers. "I'm sorry." "I believe, Dad," she said. "I should have known better. Should have come to see you myself." "You're here now," I said, squeezing her hand. "That's what matters." And it did. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. I was Clara Mayhew, retired teacher, gardener, dog owner, friend. I was someone who mattered, not because of what I could give, but because of who I was as the sun set over the Oregon hills. Painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from knowing you've survived. From knowing you've chosen yourself even when others didn't. Rusty lifted his head, his ears perking at the sound of a distant owl, and I smiled. This was my life now, and I was building it on my own terms. The Oregon dusk settled over my cottage like a soft blanket, the sky streaked with purples and golds. I sat on the porch, Rusty curled at my feet, his gentle snores blending with the hum of crickets. Inside, Sophie was brewing tea, her laughter drifting out as she teased Nathan about his terrible taste in music. This was my world now, built from the ashes of a betrayal I never thought I'd survive. At 74, I'd found something I hadn't dared hope for. A life that was mine. Sophie stepped onto the porch, her eyes bright with an idea she'd been holding on to all weekend. "Grandma," she said, sitting beside me, "I've been thinking about what happened to you, about how Roland and Victor tried to take everything. I want to start a nonprofit using your trust, a place for older people to get help, legal advice, protection from scams. A hotline for anyone who feels trapped like you did. But I need your blessing." I set my tea down, my heart swelling. "Sophie, that's incredible. And I don't. Just give my blessing. I want to be part of it. It's not just a story, but a voice." Her smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Deal," she said. "We'll call it Clara's Voice." Roland called the next week, his voice heavy with the effort of change. He'd started counseling, paid back the Willow Haven deposit, sent letters to the family admitting his lies. I agreed to a visit, but on my terms: a hotel, not my home, and only if he came to know me, not to beg forgiveness. Ellen stayed silent, her absence a choice I'd learned to accept. Some ties are better cut than mended. As I watched Sophie and Nathan plan Clara's Voice, I realized this was my legacy: not money or a house, but a chance to protect others from what I'd endured. A letter came from the local library asking me to teach reading to immigrant kids. I said yes, feeling useful in a way I hadn't in years. Life doesn't end when others try to erase you. It begins when you choose yourself. 74, I was no longer the woman who'd trembled in Roland's car. I was Clara Mayhew, teacher, grandmother, survivor, with a dog named Rusty and a purpose that lit my days. Under the Oregon stars, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.